Hey fam, it is I, your boy LP, and yes, my Halloween decorations are still up on November 4th, so sue me. Today I'm going to be reviewing this book called You Gentiles by Maurice Samuel, and this video is sponsored by Antelope Hill Publishing, who were kind enough to send me a copy of the book, and who I was happy to work with because for once I get to shill a product I actually like. Antelope Hill has a wide range of hard-to-find books with the goal of preserving history, culture, and revolutionary ideas in an age of censorship and memory holding. And I have to say, quite reasonably priced as well. For example, the book I'm reviewing today, You Gentiles, you can get for under $18, which includes free shipping within the United States. Or you could get the audio version of most of their books for under $7. You can also order their books through Amazon and other vendors. Just make sure you're getting the right copy of the books because a lot of these have original forewords and so forth written for them that are going to provide extra value. And as if all that's not good enough, you can also get an additional discount by using code LP at checkout. That is lowercase LP checkout code to save additional money on your purchase. So let's get into the book. You Gentiles is written by a Jew by the name of Maurice Samuel, and it's basically his letter to non-Jews, although it's not exactly a love letter, if you catch my drift. This was written in 1921, and something I really liked about this book is the foreword by Kevin MacDonald, which adds a lot of helpful context that I would have otherwise not known about. MacDonald explains that just prior to writing this book, they had passed an Immigration Reform Act in the United States, which was designed to restrict immigration from Eastern Europe and essentially was targeting Jews because people at the time were getting fed up with Jewish immigration. MacDonald calls it the high watermark of white racial consciousness in America and points to that law as the impetus for this book being written, which as I was reading through the book, I was like, well, this doesn't seem to have anything to do with immigration until you get to the very end in his conclusion. And he basically says, and so that's why it's evil to not have open borders. MacDonald asserts that Samuel is pushing a sort of Jewish moral particularism in which Jewish lives have more moral value than other. And according to MacDonald, this is not a very uncommon sentiment among Jews, and he gives some quotes from other famous Jews to sort of build the case here. For example, he has this quote from Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who Donald Trump recently just visited his grave. He says, "We do not have a case of profound change in which a person is merely on a superior level. Rather, we have a case of a totally different species. The body of a Jewish person is of a totally different quality from the body of members of all nations of the world. The difference of the inner quality of the body is so great that the bodies would be considered as completely different species. This is the reason why the Talmud states that there is a halachic difference in attitude about the bodies of non-Jews. Their bodies are in vain. An even greater difference exists in regard to the soul. Two contrary types of soul exist. A non-Jewish soul comes from three satanic spheres, while the Jewish soul stems from holiness." Another quote MacDonald provides reads, "The eternal uniqueness of the Jews is the result of the covenant made between God and the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. The implication is that the transcendent imperatives for Jews effectively nullify moral laws that bind the behavior of normal nations." Rabbi Shlomo Avner, one of Gush Eminim's most prolific ideologues, argues that the divine commandments of the Jewish people transcend the human notion of national rights. He explains that while God requires other nations to abide by abstract codes of justice and righteousness, such laws do not apply to Jews. It should also be noted that according to Jewish doctrine, any non-Jew is a Gentile. However, this book is quite clearly targeting Western Christian people. He talks about Americans, British, French, but he never goes outside of that. He never points at anything outside of European culture and heritage. So what does he actually say? Well, his main thesis is that there is a huge difference between Jews and Gentiles, a gulf that cannot be overcome, a gulf that is much different than, for example, the difference between English and Frenchmen. He explains this in great detail, but it could basically be boiled down to the premise that Jews are serious people while Gentiles are playful and unserious. He makes some arguments for this which are actually sort of compelling, and others that I found fell flat. For example, he points to sports culture, what people call sports ball now, and what a big deal it was to Americans. And he also talks about loyalty and how Americans will have a sort of taken for granted loyalty towards their sports team or the college they went to. Samuel doesn't understand this. He thinks that it's silly to be loyal to something so arbitrary, which, I can kind of see where he's coming from on that. Like a lot of people, their sports team was just handed down to them by their father, and people will stay loyal to that throughout their entire life and hand it down to their kids, and there really isn't that much rhyme or reason to it. Samuel posits that Gentiles love rules. They love codes of conduct. They love rules of engagement and so forth, and that's one of the big difference between them and Jews. Jews will do whatever they feel is necessary, according to Samuel, while the Gentiles have a strong sense of honor and a distaste for anyone who doesn't follow the rules. He drives this point home by talking about duels, something that doesn't really happen anymore, but back then there was a lot of them, at least in recent history. And he talks about how it doesn't make any sense to him if one man wants to kill another. There shouldn't be rules. Nothing should be considered below the belt. You should do whatever you have to do to survive. And he goes on to explain how this is basically like we make everything a game, us Gentiles, whether it's business or sports or even war. It's all a game to us with various rules, and they don't understand that. One of the arguments he makes that didn't really land with me is when he tries to argue that Gentiles love war and Jews don't. Again, he says Gentiles look at this as like a matter of honor, a chance to prove themselves and be heroic, whereas Jews will just grimly do what they have to do to get the task done. I'm not sure that this has really aged well in light of recent geopolitical events, but I'll let you be the judge. He also goes into religion and says that Gentiles are essentially polytheist by nature, which again, as a Christian, didn't really land with me. He points to the Greek and Roman pantheons of gods and says, this is your nature to have gods like that. But this is after 2,000 years of Christian dominance in the West, so I didn't really find that one that compelling. Anyway, I'm not going to go over every little thing. Skipping ahead to the conclusion, he talks about ways that this difference could be resolved, and he points to intermarriage and essentially argues that Gentiles need to just fuck the Jews out of them until there's so little left that it's gone. But claims that the reason this can't happen is because the Gentiles are too prejudiced. Their outlook on interracial marriage is too negative. And he also talks about the Jews just being assimilated culturally, essentially modernized into Gentile culture. But he also says that this can't happen fully because the Gentiles, first of all, again, are too prejudiced to let it happen. And even if they did, it still wouldn't work. He writes, the fact is that as long as Jews retain their identity, there is the same tension between your middle classes and ours as between your genius and ours. Our middle classes, even when thoroughly modernized, retain a certain individuality which is repugnant to you. And if forced to a yes or no answer to the question above enunciated, I should have to answer, yes, there is a difference, difficult to describe, but felt and resented nonetheless. And then he concludes by saying that we should at least open the borders and let Jews move around freely over the world as they wish. He writes that you watch us with vicious irritation rather than with respect, that you load us with abuse and humiliation when so much in your own instinct should have given us a peculiar place in your regard, makes me feel that nothing which can be urged upon your conscience will avail to lighten the burden of our destiny. We have just witnessed in America the repetition in the peculiar form adapted to this country of the evil farce to which the experience of many centuries has not yet quite accustomed us. If America had any meaning at all, it lay in the peculiar attempt to rise above the trend of our present civilization, the identification of race with state. In the old world, the evil had taken root in the course of centuries. Its hideous fruit was therefore inevitable. But America seemed to offer the hope of a change. Whatever other evils America had inherited, at least this one she had avoided. America was therefore the new world in this vital respect, that the state was purely an ideal, and nationality was identical only with acceptance of the ideal. But it seems now that the entire point of view was a mistaken one, that America was incapable of rising above her origins, and that the semblance of an ideal nationalism was only a stage in the proper development of the universal Gentile spirit. The ideal which for a time constituted American nationality disappears now, and in its place emerges again with atavistic certainty the race. So there you have it, 100 years later, and we're still having the same conversation. Is America a land of ideas, or is it a white country? I guess the more things change, the more they stay the same, huh? But that's it for the review. I do recommend it. It's good reading, and I would encourage you to also check out what else they have over at Antelope Hill. I'll probably be picking up a couple books myself that I'm curious about, so you should do the same, and don't forget code LP for a discount. Let me know what you guys think about all this down in the comments. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. I'll leave it there for now. Catch you on the flip side. Peace out.